it was internet, and it became viral because I used Facebook to put it over on, and it became viral, and a lot of people all over the world were listening to it and sharing it.
De båda kärnvapenmakterna Indien och Pakistan har redan utkämpat 2 krig på grund av Kashmir. I området finns ständigt hundratusentals soldater, men genom sociala medier förmedlas en verklighet som ligger bortom storpolitiken.
If you look anywhere around the world, for us Kashmiris, we have zero representation. Our voices are not even heard, you know. If the world talks about Kashmir, it talks about Kashmir in a sense that it's India and Pakistan. You know, Kashmiris, they're just ignored. So we try to use social media so that voices are heard. The youth, they have channelized, you know, what they see in the streets. They have tried to show it and portray it on social media. They click photographs, they become citizen journalists. They try to express themselves that, look, you know, we are human beings, we're being killed like mercilessly.
Men ord kan uppfattas som lika hotfulla som vapen, och den senaste tiden har tidningar stängts ner och internet och mobiltelefoni blockerats i Kashmir. Och Roshan kan inte längre uppträda.
Before my concert began, the police came in and they cornered me and they told me that if I sang anything anti-national or anything anti-India, I'll be put behind bars. So in Sweden, you know, finally, you know, I've been able to be on stage and be an MC, and I've been vocal. You know, I've talked about my experiences in Kashmir and what's happening. Freedom.
Hello, my name is Tariq Mahmood, and I welcome you to our first program, The Point, where in the coming days and coming weeks and months, we hope to discuss a variety of issues. We start today with a discussion around the unfolding events of Kashmir, but our focus is not going to be a news discussion, but more on trying to draw out the similarities between the situation of Palestine and the Palestinians and the situation of Kashmir and the Kashmiris, and how two major ideologies, the ideology of Zionism and the ideology of Hindutva, affect the political and social dynamic that unfolds in front of us. For those of you who don't know perhaps where Kashmir is, it is the butterfly shape that sits on top of the map of South Asia and China, where to one side is Pakistan, to another side is India, at the top is China, and as you may well know, this butterfly is being well trampled by forces of many forces that are affecting it. My guest today is Rania Masri. Thank you very much, Rania, for coming along.
A pleasure to be with you. A pleasure to be with you.
Rania is a long-term friend, and she is also an environmental activist and a boycott activist, and also has participated in a variety of political actions and continues to be very politically active in Lebanon. I come to you from Beirut today. Rania is in America, and we are talking to you on JKTV Live. Rania, perhaps for those of us who don't know, that in a way, the ideas that are taking place within Kashmir, perhaps you are not as well aware, but many Kashmiris are saying that India has gone for an Israeli type of a situation. This is at the same time when India is described as the biggest democracy in the world, and we have a similar situation, if you like, in the Middle East, where Israel is described as the only democracy in the Middle East. Perhaps you could explain to our viewers what do you say to that statement?
Well, hello again to you all, and thank you for inviting me to your show and for this discussion. I think when we talk about democracy, we need to take a step back and define it. I mean, what is democracy? If democracy is the rule of the few over the many, then one could argue, yes, that Israel is a democracy. If democracy is based on an occupying force, making laws that support its own occupation and ignoring the needs and equality of the majority of the people in the land, then yes, Israel is the democracy and definitely the only democracy in the region, because they are the only settler state occupation in the region. But if we're going to recognize what democracy really is, and one of the clearest tenets of democracy is equality, no way could we argue that we have a democratic state when that state's institutionalized laws are not based on equality. So we need to examine then, is there equality within the so-called state of Israel? Is there equality within Israeli laws? Is there equality within even the philosophy of Zionism? And the clear answer to that, and this is not an opinion, it's a legal answer, is no. There is no equality by Israeli laws against the occupied Palestinian people within the so-called state of Israel, nor is there equality for the Palestinian citizens of Israel itself. So if we examine that, then clearly Israel is not a democracy. It is by definition a settler state occupation.
That really brings us in a way very neatly to the situation also in South Asia, that which is happening under occupation can't really have any legal validity until the people that are occupied have some sort of say in the meaning of their lives, let alone the political direction. But one of the things perhaps we could move on to, you mentioned the word Zionism. And here, as you know, in the BJP-led government is being described as an Hindutva, an organization that bases its ideology on Hindutva, on simply put, Hindu Rashtra, Hindu rule. To what extent, and there are, as you are well aware, conferences going on in India this coming few days, were sponsored by the Israeli embassy there on the similarities between Hindutva and Zionism. To what extent could you explain to those of us who don't know what Zionism is, and also if those of us who oppose Hindutva are being accused of being anti-Hindu, that which we certainly are not, and similarly, is it that opposition to Zionism is also opposition to Judaism?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take it one step at a time. So what is Zionism? And if we look at the way that the Zionists themselves define it, the Zionists themselves define Zionism as a Jewish nationalist movement whose goal is the creation and support of a Jewish national state in Palestine. Okay, so let's break that down. So here we have one clear breakdown, which is the religion, Judaism, is defined and regarded as a nationality or an ethnicity. Okay, so if we were going to say that we want to have a Christian nationalist movement where we regard Christianity as a nationality, we can immediately see the problems that would arise as a consequence. Because the moment that one defines one's intimate relationship with God as one's nationality or ethnicity, we can see where this will go. You know, we're automatically creating laws that would support inequality. So here we have one definition, one clear breakdown of Zionism. We have another breakdown of Zionism, which is, again, as the Zionists define it, supporting a Jewish national state in Palestine, which means, therefore, to support a settler state occupation that would be founded based on ethnic cleansing. Okay, so this is their definition. And when we regard Zionism very clearly as it is a settler state occupation built on ethnic cleansing and built on the concept of one community, in this case, a Jewish community, having superiority over other communities, when we identify it as it is, we also see that Zionism is nothing exceptional in our human history. It is part and it is an intricate part of the larger project of colonialism, very simply. So let's take it even a step forward. There's a new book that has just been released by an Israeli sociologist, and the book is entitled War Over Peace. And in this book, the sociologist actually examines Zionist ideology, and he argues that war and violence are embedded within this ideology. And if we are to remember that this state of Israel was created through the brutal displacement of almost 800,000 Palestinians and the deliberate destruction of more than 500 Palestinian towns and villages, then it becomes natural to understand how this ideology cannot but be embedded within war and violence. So its core components of Zionism, again, according to this Israeli sociologist, the core components of Zionism are ethno-nationalism, where again, we have a nationalist idea built on what he defines as an ethnicity, but what I prefer to regard simply as a religion, and militarism, ethno-nationalism and militarism, okay, designed to have political and economic control over a people and over a land that is not theirs. We see the same thing in the creation of the United States by the settler colonialists that came here, in the occupation of Australia by the settler colonialists that went to Australia. We see it repeated over and over again in our history. And at the same time, we see the repetition of people fighting for their liberty in opposition to these settler colonialist projects. So this is what Zionism is. Now, if we are going to say that to be anti-Zionist would be anti-Jewish, then that is basically saying that the people have to accept their oppressor or they will be accused of racism. And it also is ahistoric. And this becomes really, really important for us to understand. Some of the key individuals that supported the Zionist movement were themselves vehement anti-Semites. Take one of the most famous characters, who's Lord Balfour. Lord Balfour in 1917 came up with this idea of giving something that's not his, which is Palestine, to the Jews. Okay, let's give them this land. And he didn't do this because he believed in the concept of a Jewish state. He did it because he did not want Jews to live amongst him in England. And again, this is not simply my perspective. These are real historians that have identified that Lord Balfour himself was one of the most vile racists. I mean, at that time, they were all quite racist. But not only that, but that he pushed for restrictions against Jewish immigration into Great Britain during the time that there were pogroms attacking Jews throughout a lot of Europe. So at the time that there was these Jews, coming from parts of Europe where they're facing pogroms, particularly in Poland and others, and they want to seek refuge within Great Britain, this is when Prime Minister Balfour in 1905 decided to pass a law called the Aliens Act that had the first restrictions on immigration into Great Britain, designed to restrict Jewish immigration. So his idea was, we'll get rid of the Jews because we don't see them as English, and we'll throw them into Palestine. Okay? Ironically, or most importantly, one could argue, that one of the loudest voices against the Balfour Declaration was himself a Jew and the only Jewish member of the cabinet. Edwin Samuel Montagu, who was the only Jewish member of the cabinet, spoke forcefully against the Balfour Declaration, and he said, and I quote, "I wish to place on record my view that the policy of His Majesty's government is anti-Semitic and will prove a rallying ground for anti-Semites in every country in the world." So here we have that the cry against the Balfour Declaration, whose aim was to give Palestine to the Jews, the cry against it was that this declaration is anti-Semitic. So again, this idea that if one condemns Zionism, one is regarded as anti-Semitic, I would argue, is in and of itself anti-Semitic. The very concept that we mix a political ideology with a religious group, and we say that any criticism of that political ideology becomes a criticism of the religious group, is in and of itself an offense against that religious group.
It's very true. I was thinking as you were talking a little bit back to the role of religion within South Asia, as you know, that Pakistan itself was created on a notion that there were two nations, the two nation theory, and in a sense that Muslims and Hindus were two separate nations. With the creation of Bangladesh, that got dismissed out into the dustbin of history. And what the Hindutva movement is now pushing, in a very large number, having won the elections within India, and also, as your viewers, our viewers may well know, that it has unleashed in itself within India many a horror, which we hope to discuss in time to come. Even as we talk, some of the feeds and comments coming on are very clearly anti-Hindu. And we want to stress here that under no circumstances is anything that we are discussing here either anti-Semitic or anti-Hindu, but a clear-cut opposition to those who would equate politics with a religion and ram that down on other people's throats. Some of the comments coming here are that, Kashmir, a free Kashmir is a dream. Okay? I have heard the same comments. Free Palestine is a dream. Get real. Accept the reality of colonialism. Accept the reality that Israel is here to stay, that settlements are here to stay. To those who would push that sort of a line, what do you say?
I think that they have not read their own history. Every movement in human history has believed in dreaming. When we looked at the abolition of slavery in the United States, where slavery officially came into existence in the United States 400 years ago, I believe that the abolitionists that were fighting against slavery believed in the dream of freedom. Were we to have gone back in time, should we have told them, no, you should accept the reality of slavery and get used to the whips being thrown against your back and get used to your children being torn from your arms? Is that what we should have told the slaves in the United States hundreds of years ago? I mean, the concept of working for workers' rights, for example, and fighting for the right for fair wages, should we also tell those that are struggling in sweatshops throughout the country, throughout the world, that no, you should accept your plight and simply bow down to your oppressor? I find that those that reject the belief in dreaming, the reality of fighting for freedom, that those that reject that tend to themselves side with the oppressor. And we reject it because of our belief in human history. And no, yes, we believe in dreaming. And yes, I believe in the dream of a free Palestine. And I believe in working valiantly to make that dream into reality. Because this reality that we are living in today, this concept that you can have Israelis supported by the United States and the United Kingdom and the Indian government go into Palestinian homes, throw them out from their homes, take their children into jails, continue to kill them without any regard, to kill them with impunity. And we should simply look and say to the Palestinians, die silently? Is that the cry of those who reject the concept and the belief in freedom, that we should die silently? Is that the alternative they are giving us? No, clearly not. History shows us that those who believe in dreaming are the only people who have actually provided something that we should be proud of in this world. So no, we believe in dreaming, and we will work together to liberate our lands and our people from the yokes of oppression.
It's very true, Rania, because if we don't believe in dreams, then we have to accept that we live in a nightmare. And what sort of life is there of living inside a nightmare?
Yes, yes.
In a way, if we can move a little bit out, just like Palestine has a huge regional implication of what goes on in Palestine. We can see the wars that, in a sense, the Israeli regime does not recognize any international rights, laws, or anything like that. And we have been pushed into a similar situation. And for our viewers, so that they don't confuse that we are on an anti-Indian tirade, we believe, in a way, I firmly believe that the solution to Kashmir lies not in India, not in Pakistan, but and also India and Pakistan are both oppressors. Yes. They have both denied the people of Kashmir their rights, and the solution lies in giving the right of self-determination to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And actually, Rania, just on a side thing, these countries, India and Pakistan, considering we are 1.6 billion or so people on the planet are turning into open-air prisons
Yes.
with all sorts of horrors taking place under the many different guises. Now, one of the things I would like to draw another parallel is that what goes on in Palestine has a direct impact
Yes.
on the region, and what goes on in Kashmir has a direct, not only region, but global. We have 1 million soldiers on the Indian side. We probably have the same sorts of numbers on the Pakistani side, the most militarized zone on the planet, and yet they send more soldiers in. And you can see that the forces of the night, as we started talking of dreams, the forces of night are bringing about an agenda of some form of ethnic cleansing. So I'd like your comments, if you can.
Yeah.
What sort of regional implications the non-resolution of the Palestinian issue can have, and from that, our Kashmiri friends and friends in South Asia can draw their own lessons to how it affects us as well?
That's a huge question. I mean, immediately I would think of two layers. So you have one layer, which is the layer of oppression, and the way that the oppressor continues to invest in oppression locally, regionally, and internationally. And you have on the other layer, the layer of resistance, and the way that resistance can spread like the fires that we believe in, not like the capitalistic fires in the Amazon right now, but like the fires of birth. So those two layers, and I think it's important to examine them within those two layers. Now, when you look at Israel currently, okay, Israel is one of the world's largest exporters of weapons, and one of the world's largest exporters, not only of weapons, but of militaristic tactics and oppression itself. It also has a very clear political line, I mean, very clear, since the 1950s, of wanting to transform the entire Middle East, which, by the way, as a side note, is a term I completely abhor, and I really don't like using it, but that's a side note.
I'm sorry, I don't like using it.
But we have evidence, and we have statements from Israeli prime ministers and Israeli sociologists, et cetera, that show us that from the 1950s, the plan of the Israeli government has been not only to subjugate the Palestinian people through ethnic cleansing and home demolitions and apartheid, but also to spread their sphere of influence throughout the region. Okay? So we have seen that their plan has been to push for sectarian statelets, smaller states, throughout the region, within Iraq, to divide Iraq into Kurds, Sunnis, and Shias, to divide Syria, to divide Lebanon, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen it in that region, and that plan is ongoing. We have also seen a very intimate relationship between the apartheid Israeli regime and the political apartheid regime of South Africa. Okay, we have seen also a close relationship between the Israeli regimes and problematic regimes throughout Africa and Central America. So we see that this policy, this idea of oppression and of subversion and of apartheid will need, by design, to create other oppressors and to support other oppressors. So it would have a raison d'être to exist. And that idea, this oppression of, this oppressor mentality of Israel cannot be separated from its racist ideology. So it will promote racism wherever it goes, and it will promote sectarian divide wherever it goes. Therefore, we see it becomes a natural ally to this problematic Indian government that we have right now. It becomes a natural ally because they both have the same philosophy. And we can talk about all of these things that I stated in a lot more detail if you want. But on the other hand, we also have the hope that comes from resistance and the hope that comes from solidarity and of recognizing that we as oppressed populations need to not only liberate ourselves through our actions, liberate ourselves through our thinking, but also recognize that our liberation is not an exception, that we are not the only ones that have been oppressed, and we are not the only ones that are currently oppressed. So how can we learn from each other's struggles? How can we build links with other communities and other people that are also facing similar struggles? How do we understand that we, as Palestinians who are being oppressed, have a long similarity with the indigenous communities throughout the Americas that are continuing to be oppressed and subjugated within Canada and the United States? What are the similarities in our struggle with their struggle? What are the similarities in our struggle with people of color throughout the United States and the United Kingdom that continue to face police brutality and racist laws and racist regards? How do we link those struggles? And now, what are the similarities between our struggle and the struggle of the people in Kashmir for liberation, for recognition, and for hope.
I think this is so important. And just to clarify, I really can't stand the idea of the Middle East. We live at the tip of West Asia, and if you're watching this from Kashmir, Middle East will be somewhere else, not here. But let's leave that as a legacy that's gone by. Just as the resistance needs to learn, in a way, if the Hindutva and Zionist forces are very clearly unifying, so too it would appear from what you've said and what a lot of people believe, so must the anti-Zionist and anti-Hindutva forces, not just in South Asia, but across the world, need to learn and unite to each other. You mentioned the relationships that are being built by these really monstrous regimes across the world with Israel and over the years. Now, could you give me a little bit? Perhaps I've read some figures that Israel supplies round about 20% of India's defense needs. Perhaps you could talk about the Israeli oppression of the Palestinians a little bit more in detail, and why Israeli weaponry is being sold and has become popular as a means used by repressive regimes.
Yes. Well, there's a brilliant report done by a journalist and a dear friend of mine, Rania Kalik, in which she examined the reasons that Israel has become one of the main exporters of weapons in the world. So I'm quoting her here in what I'm saying. We see that Israeli arms sales have increased dramatically in the past 15 years, from $2 billion a year to $9 billion a year. And what makes their weapons, the Israeli weapons, so seductive to other oppressive governments around the world is that Israel can claim that their weapons have been battlefield tested, battlefield proven. Okay, so they have tested these new weapons. Now, who are they testing their weapons on? They're testing their weapons on Palestinians, predominantly on the besieged Palestinians in Gaza. So in Gaza, you have people that are trapped in an open air prison, trapped completely by air, by sea, by land. And we need to recognize that the vast majority of the Palestinians in Gaza are refugees from 1948. And the whole reason that they're not allowed to return to their homes in what is now called the State of Israel, but what we prefer to call Palestinian lands of 1948, the whole reason they're not allowed to go back to their homes is not because there's no space for them, not because their villages have been rebuilt by Israeli Zionist forces, but simply because they're not Jews. That's the only reason they're not allowed back, again, which is the definition of apartheid, of racism, of oppression by design. But let's go back. So you have these testing grounds that the Israelis are forcing on the Palestinians. Okay, they test them in Gaza, and they also test them in the occupied West Bank. Okay? Because of these testing grounds, Israel now has become the #1 exporter of drone technology. They supply 60% of the world's drones to at least 50 different countries. And they were able to increase their export of these drones, particularly after the horrific 2014 attacks on Gaza, in which more than 2,200 Palestinians were killed in the 51-day massacre of Palestinians by the Israeli forces in 2014. Less than a month after their massacre, Israel held its annual drone expo, and Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest military technology firm, continued to advertise that their weapons have been battlefield proven. Okay, so we've seen this, but we also have another kind of horror that the Israelis are imposing, which is their border technology, their so-called border technology. Okay, and here, through the criminal, and again I say this specifically, the criminal apartheid wall that Israel has built on the occupied lands in the West Bank, they are able to take these surveillance technologies that they have learned by experience in their oppression and sell them worldwide. And as a consequence, they won a $145 million contract, again in 2014, to build a border of surveillance tower technology along the Arizona-Mexico border. So we have two kinds of oppressive forces that the Israelis are exporting. One is their weapons, and one is their surveillance and racist so-called surveillance technology. They're also building alliances with every police agency in the United States, and it would be important to understand if they're building these alliances, these so-called trainings, with policing agencies in the United Kingdom, with policing agencies in India, where they export their racist perspective and their destructive weapons?
I think you really made me get goosebumps when we were talking of how the blood of Palestinians, really, because we have all watched in Gaza the constant bombardment that takes place. But each of those bombardments, this is battle testing. It's the breaking of limbs, it's the killing of people, and in a sense that is going on. Also, earlier on, you referred to ethnic cleansing, and one of the issues that confronts us and people, I don't mean only Kashmiris or South Asians, but all those who oppose ethnic cleansing and want some sort of a just order. One of the issues that confronts us is how do we learn from each other? The forces of reaction, Hindutva and Zionism, and some of the other guises that they have come out in, whether it be ISIS or other such equivalents.
Yes.
These forces have also given an opportunity to us to begin to learn from each other. Now, many of our Kashmiri friends are really beaten down by 70 years of repression, by intense militarization. And whilst it is similar, it is not the same as Palestine, as you well know. So perhaps we could discuss a little bit more on resistance to occupation. How, since I know it's a big question, you can choose whichever part of it, the Palestinian resistance has changed in many ways, shapes, and forms since the early militarized occupation of Palestine. And one of the things I'd like Kashmiri and South Asian viewers to understand, that
have several